One thing that I see people regularly doing when they're practicing snooker, which I would not advise, is they're oversimplifying the game. Snooker is a very difficult sport. For me, definitely one of the most difficult sports. Many would say the most. It depends, I guess, what you mean by difficult. Boxing's quite difficult because you've got someone trying to punch you in the face. Golf is quite difficult because you've got things like the wind to worry about. Darts is quite difficult because it's such a finite skill. There are lots of sports which might claim to be difficult. Snooker is definitely one of those, as a very good claim. Because it's a difficult sport, you have to try and make your practice sessions effective. You have to try and make your practice sessions realistic scenarios. One good way of doing that is to simply practice playing frames. The slight problem with practicing playing frames is you don't get enough opportunities to keep potting, because the opportunity to start break building is often a very difficult one. Because it's such a difficult one, it's such a rare one in many ways, a good opportunity to break build for most players, that you're not able to practice potting as much as you need to improve. Therefore, you see people practicing something which simplifies the game, and that's great. The most common one that you'll probably see in snooker halls is somebody lining up the reds in a line from the blue ball to the pink to the black. They might have one lower than the black or a couple lower than the black. They might have a couple higher than the blue. It just depends. Sometimes you can see slight variations of that with a crosshair, where you've got maybe 10 of the reds in the same line between the blue and the black, but then you have the rest of the ball spaced out perpendicular to that, coming out at a right angle from the pink ball to make a cross. They're great things to do for practicing your positional play and your potting. This simple tweak that you can start implementing immediately as soon as you start playing will drastically help improve your game, and it will give you a better indication of what level you're really at. The problem that I see most players doing, and I used to do it too, and I used to find it very frustrating, because I was finding that my practice game was so much better than my match play, and I couldn't understand why. The reality is I was practicing something a lot easier than the actual thing that I wanted to do. If you're someone who is a beginner, complete beginner, I think you should put the cue ball, when you're practicing the lineup, somewhere where you are perfectly in position, and your task should be to stay in position, pot the balls and to stay in position. Players who aren't beginners, I think you're wasting your practice time if you stay perfectly in position. You're reducing the effectiveness. If you start perfectly in position, you're reducing the effectiveness of your practice. What I would recommend that you do is to pick a red that you want to pot and put the cue ball in a position that is a much more realistic place to find yourself. It's not that often that you're playing a match, and when it's your shot, you're perfectly on the ball. So put the ball somewhere that's a bit more realistic. You can do that by putting the ball closer to the cushions. If you're anything like me, the ball always seems drawn to the cushions. I'd like to blame the tables sometimes, but I'm sure it's me. Or one thing you can do is make the angles a little bit more difficult, and increase the distance between the cue ball and the object ball. If you miss that pot that you start with, put it back and try again. That's your practice. You need to be practicing getting from a position of You need to practice moving from being in a poor position or a mediocre position with your cue ball to potting the ball and then getting into a good position. If you might find that you pot the ball from a medium difficulty shot and you're not in position, okay, great. Then get on the next shot. Try and get into position. Once you're in position, obviously you continue your break. But can you see how that one little tweak makes your practice much more effective, and you stop lying to yourself with where you are at, and it teaches you to focus your technique, because those medium range pots are very achievable. They really are achievable, but it teaches you how to focus. It teaches you how to really think about your technique. The problem with starting in position is often your technique doesn't have to, you can get by with not doing things as perfectly. Yeah, you can get by with not doing things as well. Whereas you don't get away with it with those medium range pots, and it improves your ability. And trust me, you will find that your break building improves drastically as a result from that. So have a little play with that. Start getting it into your practice sessions. You might find it a bit frustrating at first, but practice shouldn't be easy. Practice should be something that's challenging, yet achievable. And as I say, once you've got back into position, then stay in position and, as best you can. Easier said than done. Implement those changes. Let me know in your comments if there's anything that you would like to add to that. I'd love to hear from some of your bits of advice, some of your experiences as well. Thanks for your time.